freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Thursday, October 25th, 2018 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts. Kerby is out today, and you are stuck with me yet again for the second day of the week. You're gluttons for punishment. I don't know what you did in a former life to deserve such punishment, but nevertheless, I am excited that you have decided to join us today, and we have got a packed show for you, even more so than normal. We'll have Daniel Greenfield on here in a second. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Elizabeth Warren saga. The senator from Massachusetts has gotten into some hot water relative to an Indian test that she took, an Indian DNA test, and so we'll be talking to him. Daniel is a Front Page Magazine, and his blog articles regularly appear in Family Security Matters, the Jewish Press, Times of Israel, Act for America, and the Right Side News. And so it'll be interesting to go back and forth with him over this, the implications of it, and then is this a forecast or potential, is this what looms for us in the 2020 campaign? And as you can expect, I'm probably going to take a devil's advocate position just to be able to lighten things up a little bit. And so we'll have him on here shortly, and then afterwards we'll have Karen Kataline on a little bit later on during the hour. Karen Kataline is a commentator, columnist, and talk show host. She received her master's degree in social work from Columbia University, frequent guest host on AM Talk Radio. She will be talking about some of the anti-fascists, which are the Antifa movement that's happening right now. If you've caught some of the viral videos of what's coming out of Portland right now, it's just very disturbing, to say the least, of just how these individuals are very much kind of using violence and using aggression in order to enforce their particular way of the law, which inevitably raises the question, where is the law? Where is the government kind of acting in some of these areas? And so we'll be talking to her a little bit about that. And then in the second hour, we're going to have we'll have Alisa Childers on. She is a wife, a mom, a blogger, a speaker, a worship leader, and a former she was a member of the group ZOEgirl. And so growing up as a little kid in Tennessee, I can't wait to tell her how I went to her concert and I actually have her autograph. And so so now I'll be interviewing her, so which making my little kid Tennessean dreams come true. And then I'll be in the third hour from 2 to 3, we'll have Phelim McAleer, who is one of the investigative journalists, writers, film producers, that has a new work out, Gosnell, the Untold Story of America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. It is hitting theaters, and it's just a gripping tale of what happened in Pennsylvania when Kermit Gosnell just continued to just perform a variety of abortions in unsafe ways, and he has put that story to theaters now, in theaters, and it's a very moving film, and I can't wait to be able to talk with him a little bit about it, some of the nuances, what you can be looking for, and how you can be able to access tickets to that as well. But I thought we'd go ahead and get started with the news that is just continuing to dominate the headlines. Just 2 days ago, the New York Times reported that George Soros, who is just an activist, but also a pretty successful investor, was the recipient of what was believed to be a crude, rudimentary form of a pipe bomb. Someone had had mailed that to his house. Officials kept it from being able to get to him. Never exploded, but nevertheless just gave us a glimmer of what was going to happen over the coming days. And then yesterday, as many of you are aware, everyone from CNN to the Clintons to the Obamas to Joe Biden had 2 packages to Kamala Harris, who's a representative out of California, and all of these Democratic individuals, and George Soros typically backs Democratic causes, are now also received pipe bombs yesterday. And so USA Today reports authorities were investigating 2 additional suspicious packages Wednesday evening after an all-day effort that led to the discovery of devices, including pipe bombs, sent to prominent Democrats across the country, including former President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. late Wednesday evening was a package was believed to have been addressed to former Vice President Joe Biden. There's just a variety of individuals that received these packages, but there is to be, it seemingly is a coordinated coast-to-coast attack on prominent liberals. And in the absence of answers, speculative theories abound. Candace Owens of Turning Points USA, in a now deleted tweet, wrote, quote, "I'm going to go ahead and state that there's a 0% chance that these suspicious packages were sent out by conservatives." She goes on to say, "Caravans, fake bomb threats, these leftists are going all out for the midterms." President Trump at his rally last night blamed the media. He said, quote, "The media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories," end quote, which interestingly is a one way to be able to criticize the media when a media entity, CNN, also received one of the pipe bombs. But again, this was not limited just to the right. Many on the left pointed the finger as well. There was a viral video that circulated of the president that highlights instances where he promoted violent acts. And each side pointed the finger at the other side, epitomizing what JFK said over 50 years ago when he said, quote, "Victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan." I don't know about you, but when leaders become blamers, frustrations mount because followers suffer. Winston Churchill rightly noted that when there's no enemy within, then enemies outside cannot hurt. In the scriptures, we read about the detrimental power of divisiveness from 1 Corinthians 1 to Romans 12, Galatians 5, Proverbs 17:14. When divisions are present, strength is absent. And I think it's that it just continuing what we're seeing is there's a great overreach. We have a multitude of theories, but we also have a multitude of questions because we don't have sufficient evidence right now to be able to point to any individual or entity. At the very least, what we continue to see is that there was, even CNN was reporting as early as this morning, they were showing pictures of one of the bombs that was sent to the CNN studios. I believe it was in New York that the studios were sent to. And what they found is there was kind of a graphic that kind of resembled the ISIS flag. And in this ISIS flag graphic, it's been known to be used on certain right-wing websites. And what it says underneath it in kind of a very different font, it says "Get her done," which is kind of one of the phrases from one of the Blue Collar Comedy Tour guys, and it's all very troubling to say the least. One, in a democratic republic, violence is a strike against the very core of who we are. To be able to have an ability to be able to repair the faults of our system as we pursue after a more perfect union. This idea that we can reason together, we can talk together. Hence is the reason why our founders gave us the freedom of speech. When we resort to violence, we do detriment to the very system that so many individuals have fought and died for. And it's very detrimental. And so more and more will be coming out over this. And what we want to promise to you is that we're not going to overreach. We're not going to give you speculative theories that really try to impugn motive on individuals that really, especially from the Christian perspective, we have no clue about. Like, who knows the mysteries of the heart? Jeremiah would say in Jeremiah 17, that Paul would say to the church at Corinth. We don't want to try to impugn motives to individuals when we don't know. But what we can do in the lack of evidence is to provide prayers in the midst of that. One thing our country needs more than ever right now is we just need prayers for our leaders. As it says in 1 Timothy 2, we need to pray for our neighbors. We need to continue to bless those that are our enemies, even in a rising, there appears to be rising hatred among different parties. We need to continue just to pray, but then also put feet to our prayers as well and figure out how we might spur one another on towards good works and love. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll have Daniel Greenfield on the phone to talk about Elizabeth Warren. And we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Anna Ayers is an LGBT student at Ohio University who serves in the Student Senate. She reported receiving hateful notes, including one that threatened her life. The Student Senate president assumed that at least one of the notes must have been written by someone in the Senate who would know which desk belonged to Ayers. Because of the turmoil, the Student Senate postponed all scheduled events. Instead, the students listened to Ayers speak and express her anger, frustration, and disappointment. She called the person who did that weak, cowardly, and worthless. Also, the university changed the locks on the Student Senate doors and established new office hours. Now, before you get too angry about what happened to Ayers, you might need to know that she was arrested for making false claims. The Ohio University Police Department found that she placed the messages in the Student Senate office, along with one in her residence, by herself prior to reporting them. Sadly, these false threats are becoming all too common on college campuses. Just a few months ago, my commentary was on the rash of fake hate crimes. There are websites dedicated to document these fake crimes. Many of them are perpetuated by black activists in order to convince us that racism is alive and well on campus. Others are done by Muslims, perhaps to gain sympathy for their religion or to promote the idea that Islamophobia can be found in America's universities. This latest fake story perhaps was done to promote the LGBT agenda or merely to draw attention to her sexual orientation. I applaud the school for arresting her and for the university to follow up with a story explaining that these were false claims. We need some deterrent in order to prevent future hoaxes like this. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13, opens October 26th, indivisiblemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this happy Greasy Foods Day, on this October 25th, 2018 day. I'm referencing, obviously, something that comes from the Daily Briefing. And so one of the joys of my job at Dallas Baptist University is to serve as the executive director for the Institute for Global Engagement. What the Institute does is it desires to be able to provide biblical answers to cultural issues. And one of the things that we do is we hope, as the mission of the core of what we do, is that we would be a moral and spiritual catalyst in the larger culture. And one of the ways that we do that is to be able to identify the issues that are facing us in our everyday lives, but then also to be able to provide, to allow the Bible, which is a light to our feet and a guide for our path, to be able to illuminate everything from the issues that we find in the morning newspaper to what we encounter every day. And so the Daily Briefing goes out every morning, and what I try to do is to be able to highlight the top news of the day, to be able to highlight the spirit, the kind of the cultural news of the day, and then to leave you with a couple of viral videos that hopefully will help you to fulfill what the psalmist said in Psalm 118, to rejoice in the day. Rejoice, this is the day of the Lord. And so with some of the top news, obviously, we highlight is everything that's happening relative to some of the pipe bombs that were sent out that we talked about earlier in the show, in the last segment, but then everything from the school shooter to Megyn Kelly and her comments, which we'll get to later in this segment, to even just this morning, there was a fascinating study that was put out. Why do people stay in bad relationships? Which was a new study that will come out in the November 2018 issue of the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, to another one that indicates, this was out of the Atlantic, and talking about how older people are worse than young people at telling fact from opinion. And so you can sign up for the Daily Briefing at the www.thebriefing.net, www.thebriefing.net, or you can make your way over to the Point of View website at www.pointofview.net. And when you go to the Point of View website, you'll be able to see, unfortunately, my picture. And then when you do that, you can click on over it, and then you can click subscribe, and it'll take you there. You can plug in your email address, and it'll be sure to get sent to your email every morning, hopefully before 6 o'clock in the morning Central Time, largely dependent on how much coffee I've had that morning. But nevertheless, let's continue running through some of the day's top news, because you know what? There's a lot of attention that's been given to this pipe bomb and being sent. Thankfully, none of the bombs exploded. Thankfully, no one was hurt in this. But it continues to illuminate something that we've all known to be true if we've been paying attention for the past couple of years. There's been a rise in partisanship as well as a rise in hatred of one another, impugning some of these, just impugning bad motives to individuals, even just because they disagree with you. I think that's one of the fascinating studies that came out that was documented in the book Prius or Pickup. It talked about how over the past 18 years, there's been a rise in inter-party hatred upwards of 30 points, which is just so disheartening that we would, begin to hate one another, even though we're all on this same journey. And to quote the great High School Musical, we're all in this together. And so we're all just trying to move forward towards that particular end, but we seem to be hating one another. And we, even if we just disagree with one another over particular issues. And so, but there's always good news that always seeks to kind of make its way through some of these bad news that just continues to inundate us as we try to tune in every once in a while. And that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight this morning in the daily briefing, as well as bring before you all today. This was out of New Jersey. And I mean, this is fascinating that I had not, and I am a news junkie. Like, I'm in the news every morning, all the time, and I had not seen this until this morning, because according to a Yahoo article, a mom had a gut feeling and stops a school shooter before a planned attack. Let me tell you about it. Wednesday, there was Miss Bull of Lumberton, New Jersey, woke up to a racist message on Facebook from a man in Kentucky. She is the mom of 3 biracial children, ages 16, 11, and 8, and was just concerned about the man's profile picture in which he showed off a gun. So she went on a gut feeling, a mother's intuition. A mother is always right? You never want to judge a mother's gut feeling. And so she called her local police station and filed a report. Local and state police followed up on the mom's tips, drove to the home of the 20-year-old man named Dylan Gerald just as he was leaving his house with more than 200 rounds of ammunition, a bulletproof vest, a firearm, a 100-round high-capacity magazine, and a, quote, detailed plan of attack. He was headed toward 2 school districts in Anderson County and Shelby County, and the Kentucky State Police said in a press conference. Because this woman, because of her gut feeling, she alerted police. Not only did she alert police, but then police followed up on it. And because of this mother's gut feeling, it not only saved the children, but it also had this capacity to be able to brighten our days. But this is what all moms do every day. They keep their children safe and make the world better. Mother's intuition slips forgotten lunches to hungry kids, forces reluctant children to wear rain jackets on cloudy days, and offers up silent prayers during chaotic times. These hidden heroes of our communities work tirelessly and serve selflessly. We'll never fully know all they do or how they do it all, but every once in a while, a story like this reminds us that their efforts deserve our gratitude. This afternoon, many are grateful for one mom, but I think we can all thank God for all moms. As the writer of Proverbs says, many women have done excellency, but you surpass them all. I thought that was just a fascinating story about how a mother, she saw it and she reported it. Police followed through on it. And because of that, we don't have another story that is becoming all too often populating the news headlines. But there's also been some bad news, obviously, that many of you are probably aware of. Formerly of Fox News, Megyn Kelly, but now of NBC News over the past couple of years. Well, Megyn Kelly made some remarks on Tuesday morning relative to blackface, and now it appears as though as early as this morning, there are entities, I believe Variety Magazine, The Hollywood Reporter, are reporting that she will be out of NBC. Her exit from the 9 a.m. hour, which she wasn't even on, it was pre-taped. It was a pre-tape from August 31st. This morning showing today appears to be imminent, according to CNN. Variety reported on Wednesday evening that Kelly and NBC News executives had conversations about a new role for her. But apparently that new role seems to be something radically different, even if it's going to be at NBC. Kelly's offensive remarks about blackface Halloween costumes on Tuesday raised more questions about it. And so she offered up some comments on Tuesday during a roundtable discussion relative to Halloween costumes, where she said, to give a paraphrase, she said something along the lines of, you know what, blackface wasn't a big deal where I was from, and she wasn't encouraging it, but she wasn't speaking strongly against it, which has typically been the case just because of the atrocious past of blackface. On Wednesday, she offered up a heartfelt apology on the Today Show, but there were many individuals that just did not accept that apology. Even Al Roker even went so far as to say that there was more that needed to be done with that. Blackface is just it's an atrocious part of our history here in the U.S., stretching back to the 1830s. Blackface demeaned and denigrated. You know, you would paint your face black in makeup to degrade a race by playing upon negative stereotypes to an exaggerative level. It just quite literally typifies racism. And even more so than just having the atrocious history in the past, it strikes affront at the very image of God that all of God's children are created in. In the scriptures, we read about Babel that separated us, and also about Christ who wants to unite us from Genesis 11 as well as Acts 2. Racism builds up walls and by demeaning people, while Christ teared down the dividing wall, according to Ephesians 2:14 and Galatians 3:26-28. I don't know if Megyn Kelly knew the history of blackface. I don't think any of us can know if she knew the history of blackface. But here's what I do know, that blackface has an ugly history with no future in heaven when we all gather before the very throne room of every nation, tribe, and ethnicity and come together to sing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." But we have got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll have Karen Kataline on the phone talking about Antifa and some of the Antifa movement that's making its way not only across college campuses, but also across the larger culture. So you're going to want to stick around for that. Karen, obviously, as I mentioned before, is a commentator, columnist, talk show host, received her master's degree in social work from Columbia University, and is a frequent guest host on AM Talk Radio. We'll have her here on Point of View here right after the break, but we'll also be taking some of your phone calls and questions. If you have a question about Antifa or any of kind of some of these movements, you can be sure to call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And for those of you that have this thing called Facebook, you can go on facebook.com/Point of View Radio, and you can list a question or comment underneath the live video feed box, and what you mention online we'll try to get to over air as well. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back, more with Karen Kataline right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and so grateful that you decided to join us today on this news that continues to move forward so quickly, everything from Megyn Kelly to some of the pipe bombs that were sent. But we're going to transition a little bit. We've got on the line right now Karen Kataline. Karen Kataline's a commentator, a columnist, a talk show host. She received her master's degree in social work from Columbia University as a frequent guest host on AM a talk radio show. She's a producer and host of Spouting Off, a live internet call-in talk show covering politics, pop culture, and a little psychology thrown in. Karen, how are you?
It's great to be with you, Nick. Thanks for inviting me.
We are so grateful.
News out there. Huh?
There's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that are going on, and we're so grateful that you decided to join us today because there's something that's not in the news, but is so prevalent that's happening in the culture right now, which is kind of this Antifa, some of these fascist movements that continue to move forward. Help us to better understand that.
Well, I used it almost in passing with a piece I wrote about compromise and how the left wants to draw a moral equivalence between the way they've been behaving and the way conservatives have been behaving. And I think it goes directly to what's going on right now. But specifically, we've seen not just the Antifa, which is perhaps the violent arm of the current modern left, but we're seeing just a broad range of tolerance of violence, of violent protesters on college campuses, of assaulting candidates, GOP candidates in Minnesota. This has been going on ever since the left lost their lunch over Donald Trump beating them. And they've never gotten over it since. And they've tacitly tolerated it. They've, in some cases, incited violence. And just to draw a comparison to what's happening today, we do not know exactly what's going on with these bombs, but it stands to reason that they like to be the winners in the victim derby. And they've been coming off as perpetrators. So it wouldn't surprise me, although I have no facts to back this up, that they want to neutralize the narrative that they are the perpetrators in all of this, which is exactly what they've been, so that they can continue to paint Republicans as the evil, racist, bigoted perpetrators that they continue to paint us. It's all lies. It's all a political narrative. And voila, it's happening less than 2 weeks before the midterms.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a connection.
Okay, so if I'm one of our listeners, I'm going to play devil's advocate here because I am persuaded, obviously, from the conservative side. But what I'm interested in is there's an individual Michael Montaigne, who's a French philosopher, 18th century. I'm always captivated by his line. There's nothing more boring than a conversation in which everybody agrees. And so, for the sake of disagreement, well, I'm just going to play the other side. So I'll play this skeptic, the devil's advocate, one might be able to say, and I'll offer this. Well, couldn't you say that this is also happening on the right as well? So individuals will point to kind of some of the viral video that just went out through Twitter of the president issuing up statements of violence at some of his rallies, or the representative out of Montana that body slammed a reporter for The Guardian earlier this year. Wouldn't you say that this is happening on both sides, though?
No, I wouldn't. And that was exactly. And I love arguing.
Yes, man, I love it.
I'm a nice Jewish girl. It's genetic.
I love it. So why would you say it wouldn't? Because it seems as though there's instances where it's happening on the other side as well, on both sides.
Well, yeah, but the displacement and the need and the desperate need to blame Donald Trump for everything, absolutely everything, including the sun not coming up in the morning, the bias and the motive for blaming him defies credulity. You cannot compare the selective outrage in which leftists get furious because Donald Trump was misquoted about something. I mean, has his language been brash? Sure. But is it any more brash or more hateful than the left? Heck no, it's not. And plus, in instances, we can see where United States senators have either been quiet or they have, in my opinion, during the Kavanaugh hearings, I think that what can we conclude when crazy hair on fire leftists were interrupting the Kavanaugh hearings and were sitting in the balcony there?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And they could not have gotten in without being invited as guests by Democrat senators. Have we investigated that? No. We tolerated this constant insanity. And then what happens is the misbehavior of the left, they justify it and say, oh, well, it's Trump's fault that we're misbehaving this way.
Yeah.
I mean, the logic is ridiculous. But, some people buy into it because they have a desire to see the Democrats always as victims. They're not.
So again, this is just, we're living in a news cyclone right now. It's not even a news cycle anymore. So just within the past 20 minutes, while we've literally been on air, this was just in. Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley has referred Julie Swetnick and Michael Avenatti to the DOJ for criminal investigation, alleging the two engaged in a potential conspiracy to provide false statements during the Kavanaugh confirmation. So that's just now happening, because I think you bring up a really great point relative to the other side, the left side, that they're offering up some of these ridiculous claims that are just dragging Judge Kavanaugh through the mud through some of these instances. But I'll continue just for the sake of argument's sake. We'll say, isn't there a difference though between an activist and a sitting president offering up some of these comments?
Oh, boy, you've given me so much to work with.
I love this. I love it.
First off, I love it. First off, I just have to say that is wonderful news about Grassley.
Completely agree.
Because the left, I love it, because the left is constantly trying to bully us into not holding certain groups accountable. We're not allowed to hold any people who happen to be black accountable, especially if they were our previous president. We're not allowed to hold women accountable because now they're victims. I write extensively on this Me Too movement. And so the fact that Grassley is not paying attention to that is a good thing. So I love that. Now, wow. It's interesting to me that the left has been instrumental. They're always the ones who lead culture. It's because they control Hollywood. They control, they've always been at the forefront of culture. The college campuses, they own these things. So I just find it sad and also slightly amusing, if it weren't so serious, that they trash our culture. And then they come right around and try to moralize to the rest of us how we're not living up to some puritanical view of theirs. They trash the culture such that weenie Republicans, you should pardon me, in the past take a lot of, what is it? They take media training to appear just as boring as you could possibly be, because we expect our politicians to rise above the fray and be statesmanlike. But what we know, especially when the left is constantly trashing them, sometimes for good reason, that they're a product of the same culture that everyone else is. We have never had a president on the Republican side who could fight with them, who was a pop culture president, so to speak, and who could fight them on their own turf. And that's one of several reasons why they've lost their minds.
Yeah.
Because it's easy. If they had a Ted Cruz, or if they had, oh my God, like a John Kasich, they would have made mincemeat of him. All they would have had to do was look at him funny, and he would have gone crying. But a Donald Trump, they don't know what to do with him. He just doesn't quit.
Yeah, he's a fighter, to say the very least.
Trump is a president for our age right now. And I would say that of all the things he said, if that came out of the mouth of a Democrat Democrats wouldn't have had any problem with it at all. They wouldn't have twisted it. They wouldn't have tried to parse it to make it look like he's a racist, which he is not. So, this is their tactics, and they're being found out now. They're being exposed for the dishonest, disingenuous people they really are. Am I a little verbose? I'm sorry.
No, I love it. You're giving us so much to be able to talk about. But before we talk anymore, we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue to have Karen Kataline on the line. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Antifa movement that's spreading across college campuses, and then just the wider culture, as well as she's written on Me Too. But there's just, let's just be honest, there's so much that I want to talk about right now relative to Me Too, Antifa, as well as criticizing the president, and also some words about the president. But we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You probably know the story of Aaron and Melissa Klein, the bakers in Oregon forced out of business and fined $135,000 by the state when they politely declined business that would have forced them to violate their religious convictions. What you may not know is that after the state of Oregon pronounced them guilty of discrimination, private citizens were eager to show their contempt for the Kleins. Many of the comments they received are so vulgar that I cannot repeat them here, but here is a tame sampling. One person writing on Facebook said to the Kleins, "I hope your shop burns." Another chimed in, noting that she hoped Aaron and Melissa would burn in hell. One man sent a message that said, "I hope you lose your house and have to live on the streets." One woman even said, "We hope your children get cancer and die." When the government declares that citizens like Aaron and Melissa are not entitled to the Constitution's promises of religious liberty and free speech, its people push aside any goodwill that allows people to coexist peacefully with beliefs with which they may disagree. Aaron and Melissa have asked the Oregon Supreme Court to review their case. We hope the court will accept the appeal, if only to remind everyone that it is possible to live peacefully as neighbors, even when we disagree. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined over the phone by Karen Kataline. She's the commentator, columnist, talk show host. Her op-eds can be seen in everywhere from Investors Business Daily, Western Journal, Town Hall, Daily Caller, The American Thinker. Karen, as always, so good to have you on. One of the things that we were talking about before the break is just the fighter that our president is. And so I guess one of the retorts to that has been that our president has been someone that hasn't kind of, I don't know, there's just hasn't been that gravitas. But then the rebuttal has been that he's a modern president is what he would argue for. And so help us to be able to work through this. What is the draw of President Trump? Should there be more of a kind of a gravitas with him in the presidency?
I think he's building the kind of gravitas we haven't seen in a Republican president for decades and decades. We have been willing to settle for the appearance of gravitas instead of gravitas itself. One of the reasons why there's a lot of Republicans who still haven't been able to get on board, people like Bill Kristol and, oh my God, Ben Sass, people like that, is because Donald Trump exposes not only the left, but he exposes the right as well. They've been putting one over on us. They've been telling us, oh, it's rarefied air here and we can't get anything done, and it takes 47 years to do anything. And Donald Trump came on and said, you know what? I'm the product of the exact principles you've been saying you believe in. Free markets, competition, being the best you can be, getting up when you fall down. These are fundamental capitalist free market principles. And not only is he draining the swamp, I love the term because it's true, it's an ugly, nasty place, Washington, D.C., but he's also showing people that they've been handing us a load of bunk. And so instead of an airbrushed John Edwards with good hair, I would rather have a real guy.
I mean, it's really good hair. I mean, he's got a $300 haircut. It's pretty good hair.
He has good hair, yeah. I would rather have a guy who has the skin of an armadillo, Donald Trump does. And it is simply because he's so willing to be shredded or attempted to be shredded by these people that he shows us every day who they always were. This is who they always were. They're filled with hatred and vitriol. And they have, just to get back to the point you invited me on here to talk about, but I mean, I love it because it's all related. It really is. And that is that I was listening to that profound commercial that you had on about First Liberty and about religious freedom and the horrible, horrible letters that this couple in Oregon have sustained. It so happens I hail from, and my hometown is Denver, Colorado. So I watched the Masterpiece Cake Shop case very, very closely. And the left is fully and 100% responsible for putting forth the idea in our public consciousness that if you disagree with them, you're not just disagreeing, you're evil.
Yeah.
I mean, they've turned justice on its head, and they've said, if you disagree with gay marriage, you are anti-gay. I mean, that is fundamentally illogical. If you disagree with open borders, you're a xenophobe.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that I always think about when I'm thinking about Antifa and I'm thinking about some of these other individuals on the extremes of both sides is an overemphasis upon politics, just an unnecessary, unhealthy reliance upon the political arena. And so, especially from the conservative perspective, because you have everyone from Edmund Burke to Russell Kirk to Irving Babbitt, all of these individuals are saying that the conservatives are wanting a limited type style of government because they believe it to be true that they're more permanent things. They're better things that need to be protected from the government. And so there's this limited nature to government. But it seems as though, and especially when you reference Ben Sass, Senator Sass came out with a new book called Them and Why We Hate One Another. And he kind of touches upon this idea of just this over-reliance, this idolization of politics that I think brings us to this particular juncture where you just have these individuals. And again, from my perspective, it seems, yes, it's on the left significantly, but I think there's elements of it on the right as well. Would you agree that that we're really there's an over-reliance and just an unhealthy level of attention being given to politics right now, especially, I mean, just on both sides?
Well, I think that there certainly is a reaction to the obsession with government that the left has.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think that there's also there's a good many Republicans who been in politics forever, and they fully 100% either underestimate what we're up against here. They're either gullible about the tactics used on the left, or they're part of the corruption. Case in point, this is a suspicion I have, and in fact, I think it was Dinesh D'Souza who pointed it out. During that huge Charlottesville situation, in which supposedly it was Antifa versus the KKK. Well, Richard Spencer is the guy they gave as the head of the white supremacists and the Aryan Nation or whatever he is. And keep in mind, you know, I'm put the Judeo and Judeo-Christian here. I don't have any love for the KKK. But Richard Spencer is another agent provocateur. He is from the left. So the left is constantly trying to draw this moral equivalence and claiming that there is a radical right wing, the alt-right, and all of that. I think most of that, not that there aren't still white supremacists, but I think for the most part, this is a narrative the left has been trying to push in order to justify hatred and violence. I mean, if you're going to feel justified in your bad behavior, you have to feel like a victim, right?
Yeah.
You have to feel like, well, people hate me and therefore it's okay what I do to them.
Help me understand. You made an interesting point. Help me understand the Richard Spencer being from the left. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, see, and I don't think a lot of people have. I did my own research, and I found out that the language that he used, for example, unite the right, the minute I heard that, I was immediately suspicious because that's leftist lingo. If I'm not mistaken, and pardon me if I am wrong, I mean, I do get that way, especially when I get all worked up. I think Dinesh D'Souza actually pointed that out, that a lot of these are agents provocateur. There were, almost in the first week that Donald Trump was elected, there were people painting swastikas in various places around the country in order to immediately blame Donald Trump as bringing out, you know, these Nazis and white supremacists. Well, for one thing, they were painting the swastikas backwards, so they didn't even know how, and most of them were proven to be leftists. So Richard Spencer, the Unite the Right, I think because it was used for so long, to this very day there are leftists who believe that the Charlottesville was some horrendous thing because they got Trump to say that there's problems on both sides. Well, he was talking about the Antifa people. He was talking about people who go and
wouldn't you say some of them were saying that
start violence?
Wouldn't you say some of them? And again, I think we've. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to explore that line because it's so much. But we're going to have you on again because I am significantly interested in some of the things that you're saying, and this is such a good conversation. We can go back and forth on it. And so, well, thank you so much, Karen Kataline.
People would like to get in.
How can they find more information on you?
KarenKataline.com. Last name spelled Kataline. Argue with me, write me. I'd love to hear from you.
So great. Karen Kataline, you have been phenomenal. We appreciate you so much, but we've got to take a break. When we come back from the break, we're going to have more. We'll have on with us Alisa Childers. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Thursday, October 25th, 2018 day. You all have been stuck with me for 2 days this week. So I apologize. I'm used to being the Wednesday guy, but you had to deal with me on Monday, and then you did something wrong in a previous life and had to now have to deal with me again on a Thursday. But nevertheless, on this Greasy Foods Day, I am so grateful that you decided to join us here for the second hour for our Dallas and Minnesota audience, and then also nationwide. Welcome to Point of View. This is not the Millennial Roundtable. This is just me, and we have been talking about some of the news. We're so grateful that you decided to join us today. We've got quite a show for you over the next couple of hours. We'll have on here with us here pretty shortly. We'll have Alisa Childers will be here with us. She's a worship leader, a blogger, a speaker, a wife, a mom, and specifically she's dealing with the topic of apologetics. And so from the millennial perspective, I can't wait to be able to talk with her. But then later on during the second hour, we'll also have Phelim McAleer. Phelim McAleer is one of the veteran journalists, writers, film producers of what the new book that has come out, but also the movie that chronicles Kermit Gosnell, and the book is titled Gosnell, The Untold Story of America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. And so we'll have him on to talk a little bit about the movie, a little bit about Kermit Gosnell, and just the atrocity that was happening up in Pennsylvania while he was still working as an abortion doctor, and then kind of some of the hopes and dreams and aspirations for this film and kind of what inspired a lot of it. I'm really excited to be able to dig in with him and ask him questions. But nevertheless, right now we've got Alisa Childers on, who was formerly of the group ZOEgirl. And so, Alisa, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Nick. How are you?
I am so well, but I need to go ahead and reference this. And I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, and now I'm here in Dallas, Texas. But I just need you to know, at a Rivers and Spires festival when I was growing up, I saw ZOEgirl for the first time, and I actually have your autograph. I wanted to go ahead. I wanted to go ahead and put that out there right now, and just to let you know about that. But nevertheless, we're so excited to have you on. So tell us a little bit about your ministry. It seems like you've made the transition again from worship leading, but now it seems as though there's quite a bit of interest in apologetics.
Yeah, well, I still lead worship. I'm an artist in residence in a church in Ohio, and I go up there every 4 to 6 weeks or so and do the music for their weekend services. But yes, I started an apologetics blog about 2 years ago. And it's been so much fun. And then I started a podcast. So I've just been having a lot of fun sharing all the things that I've learned over the past several years and just trying to help other Christians work through their doubts and even spot counterfeit types of Christianity that they're interacting with in some of the books they're reading and blogs and things like that.
That's phenomenal. So were you someone that always just had questions growing up, and so it was just natural kind of towards the apologetics, or was this just something that kind of sprung up that you knew that this was the next season that the Lord was calling you to?
Yeah, no, I was not an apologetics person growing up at all. I was always just more of like a flaky artist. You know, I was always singing, writing songs, and of course in the music business and all of that. I always loved the Bible, though. Ever since I could read and write, I would read and study the Bible. I've always loved the Bible. And so that was something that from a very early age I recognized as truth. I recognized that this is God's word and did my best to live my life by it. So I was very involved in all kinds of different ministries growing up. And we would do street ministry out on the streets of New York and LA just throughout my time growing up, and I would, sing and help with homeless ministry and all kinds of things. So, Christianity, just living our faith and living the gospel was always something that was modeled for me in just a beautiful way. But the intellectual side of things was really not something that I had ever thought very much about. Honestly, I never really doubted God. I never doubted that he existed or that Christianity was true. I just knew it was true. And I can't say that I had a blind faith, because my faith was informed. I watched the gospel change people's lives. I watched the power of God, working in real life situations, and just the validity of the Bible living itself out in my own life. But the reason I got to get interested in apologetics is a little bit of an understatement, because I was sort of thrown into it because of a situation that happened when I was, about in my mid-30s. So I had already done the music business thing. ZOEgirl had come to an end. I was a new mom, and so I was still doing some music. And so my husband and I started attending this local church here in Middle Tennessee, and I was doing some music there, and we just loved it. We connected with the people and with the pastor. And so after a few months, the pastor invited me to be a part of just a very small discussion study group that he was describing would be kind of really intensive and intellectual. And that really sounded exciting to me, because I was in that phase of motherhood where I was just coming up for air, and my whole entire life had been consumed with researching diaper brands and, organic mattresses and all of that stuff. And just the intellectual stimulation of that sounded really appealing to me. So I went to the class, and the best way I can describe it is that it was a lot like the stories you hear about Christian kids growing up in church, growing up in Christian homes, and then they go to college and have their faith dismantled by an atheist philosophy professor or an evolutionary biology class, and they all of a sudden are just filled with all these doubts, and often they'll walk away from their faith. So it was a very similar thing that happened, where this pastor revealed in the context of this class that he was really an agnostic. And so he began to bring up questions that I'd never really thought of before, objections to certain things Christians have always believed that I hadn't ever heard before or even really thought about before. And so much like that kid in the classroom, it really shook me to my core. It really shook up my faith. It was a long class. It was supposed to be 4 years. I lasted about 4 months. But just literally everything that I had ever believed about Jesus, about God, and especially about the Bible. The Bible was always kind of a topic of scrutiny in this class. It was just all challenged in a way that was very intellectual. And at the time, it really seemed like it was logical. Like intellectually, I couldn't interact with what he was saying. I didn't know how to answer it. And so at one point, I just thought, okay, this guy is obviously really smart, and everything that he's coming up with, he has the same facts that everybody else does, but somewhere there's somebody that has those same facts and has come to a different conclusion. And I need to find that person, and I need to know what conclusions they've come to, and then compare and figure out what I think is true. And so it really threw me into, not to sound cliche, but like a dark night of the soul, where for the first time in my life, I was wrestling with doubts that went so deep. It went beyond what I was thinking about what the Bible said, or maybe about something Jesus said. But I mean, this kind of doubt was on the deep level of, my goodness, is everything I've ever believed a lie? Wow. And I was even struggling with, does God exist? Like, is this just all of those times I was in worship services and I felt the goosebumps, and I felt the, what I thought was the Holy Spirit, was that just synapses in my brain firing off in response to some kind of stimuli? So it was really difficult, and my daughter was real young.
Well, we're gonna have to take one break, but when we come back from the break, we're gonna pick back up when your daughter was born. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Anna Ayers is an LGBT student at Ohio University who serves in the Student Senate. She reported receiving hateful notes, including one that threatened her life. The Student Senate president assumed that at least one of the notes must have been written by someone in the Senate who would know which desk belonged to Ayers. Because of the turmoil, the Student Senate postponed all scheduled events. Instead, the students listened to Ayers speak and express her anger, frustration, and disappointment. She called the person who did that weak, cowardly, and worthless. Also, the university changed the locks on the Student Senate doors and established new office hours. Now, before you get too angry about what happened to Ayers, you might need to know that she was arrested for making false claims. The Ohio University Police Department found that she placed the messages in the Student Senate office, along with one in her residence, by herself prior to reporting them. Sadly, these false threats are becoming all too common on college campuses. Just a few months ago, my commentary was on the rash of fake hate crimes. There are websites dedicated to document these fake crimes. Many of them are perpetuated by black activists in order to convince us that racism is alive and well on campus. Others are done by Muslims, perhaps to gain sympathy for their religion or to promote the idea that Islamophobia can be found in America's universities. This latest fake story perhaps was done to promote the LGBT agenda or merely to draw attention to her sexual orientation. I applaud the school for arresting her and for the university to follow up with a story explaining that these were false claims. We need some deterrent in order to prevent future hoaxes like this. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13. Opens October 26th. IndivisibleMovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Thursday, October 25th, 2018 day, we are joined over the phone by Alisa Childers. She is the wife, mom, blogger, speaker, worship leader, formerly band member of ZOEgirl. She is now making her way into the space of apologetics. And Alisa, you were talking a little bit, you're sharing your story about this transition that was happening as you were moving into the apologetic space. And I'm sorry we had that commercial that came on, but you tell us a little bit more. You had started feeling some of these chills while you were leading worship. You were contemplating, is this doubts? Is this just synapses that are going off in your brain? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so I was kind of plunged into a season of pretty dark doubt, just not really knowing if everything I've ever believed was true. I mean, there was something deep in me that knew it was true. And I can't deny that. I never walked away from my faith, but I would cry out to God, whereas before I would cry out to God knowing he was there, knowing he was listening. And during this season, I would be crying out to God, hoping he was there, hoping he was listening. And so I asked God to help me to, I'm an artist, so I think in metaphors, but it was as if I had been thrown into a stormy ocean, and I couldn't get my bearings. And so I asked the Lord to send me a lifeboat. Just, God, please send me a lifeboat. And I think also at that time I had to be prepared that if what I had always believed wasn't true, to follow truth. And so I was praying that. And then one day I was in my car and I heard the radio come on. I turned the radio on and I heard this grandfatherly, just kind of warm voice. And he was answering all of the questions that this pastor had brought up in this class that had challenged my faith. And he was just answering them one by one. And he was doing it so calmly and so kindly. And And it really it caused a light to go on, because at that point, I didn't actually know that there were a lot of people that could answer some of these questions.
Yeah.
I think I had a vague notion of what apologetics was, maybe that it had something to do with world religions or something like that. But I didn't actually realize that all of the things that this pastor had been bringing up in this class are things that Christians have been engaging intellectually with for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the voice I heard was Ravi Zacharias, which many of your listeners will know. And so it was through his ministry, through the app I downloaded on my phone, that I discovered just the wide world of apologetics and history and theology and just the more intellectual side of my faith. And so this was, of course, my daughter's 10 now, so this was quite a few years ago, but I had studied apologetics for many years, just really intensely, to answer my own questions that had been brought up with this class. And so a couple of years ago, I never had an intention of starting a blog or doing anything like that. I thought the world has enough blogs. There are enough people on the internet giving their opinions. We don't need more. But I went to a training to kind of see how I might be able to help facilitate apologetics in my local sphere, just maybe in my church or where. And so this was a training that was put on by Frank Turek through his Cross-Examined ministry. And so it was at the end of that training that I was kind of saying my goodbyes to everybody. And Frank was like, you need to start a blog. And so I thought, well, if Frank Turek tells you to start a blog, then that's what you have to do. So I did. And so I started the blog. Then I just kind of got a bee in my bonnet to start a podcast. And so I did that. And so I've been doing that for a couple of years. And it just brings me a lot of fulfillment to try and help. I think at that point when I went to that training, I was satisfied with my own faith. At that point, I had, okay, I feel like enough of my questions have been answered that I'm either going to move on to something else or something. But the Lord really kind of ushered in this ministry for me. And I find it almost in many ways way more fulfilling than music ministry ever was.
Well, help us to be able, because I think you bring up a great point. One, you have a unique background. Two, there's obviously a hunger to be able to find answers to some of the questions that I think many of us kind of spawn some of this doubt or kind of spawn some of this hesitation. So with your blog in particular, you've mentioned what I think many of our listeners know to be true. There's just a number of individuals out there that are writing in this space. What's your particular audience that you're kind of gearing towards? What can someone expect when they come onto your blog? Where's your niche in the market?
Right. Well, it's funny because when I first started, my blog was just really general. I didn't really have a specific audience in mind beyond, I knew I wasn't writing to atheists. I knew I wasn't writing to try to convince atheists about anything. So I knew I was writing to Christians. And I think that in the beginning, my thought was just a broad kind of just the average Joe Christian who maybe hasn't thought about some of this stuff before. And, maybe a blog post here and there will make them go, oh, yeah, I did. I heard somebody say something like that. And, here's what, history says about it in the Bible and all kinds of things. And so that's always kind of the audience I've had in my mind. But more recently, I've started to kind of zero in on progressive Christianity. And the reason that I have zeroed in on that particular movement is because this church that I had been a part of, where I took that class, where the pastor was an agnostic and had challenged my faith, went on to become what they called a progressive Christian community. And so I feel like I got to observe a church go from just sort of your non-denominational evangelical church to a completely progressive church, going from being creedal and, saying the creeds once a week or however often they said them, to completely rejecting all of that and becoming, more of like moral relativism and not seeing the Bible as any kind of an authoritative source for truth. And so I watched that progression happen. And so when I see those ideas popping up, just even in mainstream evangelical culture, it always sends off a red flag for me, because I recognize it, because I was sort of on the ground floor of watching that happen to a church and to a lot of my friends. It was very hard to watch that happen to some of my friends. And so, so I kind of started to zero in on that, which some of my most popular posts have been on that subject. And what that tells me is that a lot of Christians are hearing these progressive ideas, even, in the books they're reading, in the blogs they're reading, but also even in their churches. I've had a lot of people email me saying, hey, I'm hearing these things from the pulpit, and this sounds a lot like what you're describing with progressive Christianity. So I've sort of kind of zeroed in on that and had a real passion to address that movement from a biblical view, hopefully with compassion.
So help us to understand for our listeners. So you talk about progressive Christianity, which I think there's characteristics to that. So if you could spell that out a little bit. And then for our listeners that are gearing up and making plans to be able to go to church this upcoming Sunday, and then obviously there's the after church meal, which some of us are particularly interested. No, I'm just kidding. So what are some of those elements of progressive Christianity that you believe are slipping into mainstream Christianity, you would say?
Yeah, well, I guess it would be helpful to first kind of define what progressive Christianity is. Many people will remember a lot of talk about the emergent church in the late 90s, early 2000s. And when the emergent church sort of sprung up, they were bringing some really legitimate critiques of evangelicalism. Maybe we haven't been doing this right, or maybe we've focused too much on this. And they were sort of pointing out some abuses and some hypocrisy, things that probably did need to be addressed. And so in that first round of emerging Christians, emergent church, there were some biblically orthodox Christians trying to bring legitimate changes, but there were also more theologically liberal Christians trying to bring those changes. So basically what ended up happening is the theologically orthodox people sort of got washed out. And so the movement, people say, it depends on who you ask historically if emergent church still exists or not. But in my view, it's all just become what I now call progressive Christianity. So basically, as they brought in some of these legitimate critiques, long story short, they end up kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So progressive Christianity sort of exists on a spectrum, I would say. So you have everyone from people who might be more progressive in their views on social issues, but still holding to a more orthodox view of Christology and, just the soteriology. And that would be like the one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people calling themselves Christians that deny the resurrection of Jesus. They deny that biblical authority. They deny that the deity of Jesus. They deny the atonement. Yeah. And so, you'll find progressive Christians on multiple places on that spectrum. But the thing I think that sets progressive Christianity apart from what I call historic Christianity is that historically Christians have always agreed on certain tenets. Like, this is what unites us. This is what we believe. And if you don't believe such and such a thing, you really can't call yourself a Christian.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Rob Bell does when he talks about how some of the pillars of they're not so much pillars as much as they're trampolines. And so there's springs on a trampoline from Velvet Elvis. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, I'm really interested again, and I think our listeners are as well, like progressive Christianity as well as how it's popping up in the mainstream. But we'll be back right after this.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country, but I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters October 26th. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute. And that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have Alisa Childers, formerly of ZOEgirl, the worship leader, blogger, speaker, wife, mom that's joined us. She is in the space of apologetics now, and she was telling us a little bit right before the break about really not the differentiation, but really helping us better understand progressive Christianity and how that's making its way into the mainstream. And Alisa, as I was saying right before the break, I think one of the ways that I was captivated by kind of this I guess before it was called progressive Christianity, I guess the emergent church, I guess one of the pretty significant figures besides Brian McLaren, you also had an individual named Rob Bell, which I think many of our listeners would be familiar with. Bell had the book Velvet Elvis that I think was very much kind of to what you were speaking to, a kind of a critique of what the church was doing, but also was, to a certain degree, there were some helpful elements in it, but holistically, it began raising some of those questions that I think you were talking about. Specifically, what a lot of people point to is it was raising the question of what if the virgin birth wasn't real? And so speaking against the validity, and I think you were getting at that right before sorry I had to interrupt you there, but it helped us to continue to understand what is progressive Christianity, and then trying to understand how is it making its way, and what are some of the key phrases or potentially the issues that are kind of infiltrating into the mainstream.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up Rob Bell, because he is one of the singularly most influential, I think, speakers and just individuals in that movement, and he's really influenced a lot of thought, along with Brian McLaren and Doug Padgett and Rachel Held Evans, and then further down the line you have your Jen Hatmakers and people like that. So yeah, I think I was talking about how it kind of exists on a spectrum, and the reason that there aren't officially, of course, any tenets that you have to affirm to call yourself a progressive Christian, but it's usually defined more by its rejection of some of the more historic ideas that Christians have had for the last 2,000 years, the things that has made Christianity unique in the world. One big one is the atonement. Mm-hmm. So, Christians have historically believed that Jesus died for our sins, that his blood has made us clean. There's lots of ways the Bible talks about what happened on the cross, but I think, most historically Christians have agreed that Jesus died in our place, and that, his blood paid for our sins. And this is something that in the progressive world, many people refer to as cosmic child abuse. And they're now teaching that this is a pagan idea. This is something that early Christians, and when they say early Christians, they're meaning often the actual writers of Scripture themselves, that these people imported a Greco-Roman pagan idea of blood sacrifice. The gods are angry. We have to appease the gods. And that's never really what God intended. That, Jesus didn't die in that sense for our sins, but he was killed, he was murdered, and really he came in just to usher in a new kingdom, but we wanted our pound of flesh, so we killed him, and so it sort of has taken on this completely alternative narrative that's contrary to what Christians have historically believed. And I don't mean to oversimplify. Christians have argued, obviously, about different atonement theories and, what actually happened on the cross and what should we emphasize and this and that. But there just kind of seems to be in the progressive church a complete rejection of the idea of atonement. Yeah. And so then, of course, when that falls, then you're thinking, well, what is sin then? And so that becomes more something like bad choices we make on earth and we reap the consequences here. And so it sort of just becomes very relativistic and very very pluralistic as well. There are many progressive Christians who will not say Jesus is the only way to God, that there are Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims who will be in heaven because they because they worshipped as best they knew how, or something like that, or if they even believe in heaven. So.
Yeah, I think, because again, just to kind of give allusion to Rob Bell and Love Wins. And so I think, but I do think you bring up a really good point that I think is really important for us to be able to stress in this moment, in that it's not that historically Christians have always argued over particular issues. We even do it today. So we can think about baptism, for example. Baptism, if you're a Presbyterian, you're more baptism before belief, and it's more of a welcoming into the community kind of perspective. And then, but if you're of the Baptist persuasion, baptism would only happen after you've had your confession of faith and believe Jesus Christ is Lord. That's when there's baptism. And those are the type of open-handed issues that, we can disagree on, but we can still be in fellowship with one another. And we know there's more issues to that about open and closed communion. Will I let somebody that is from a different church come and take the Lord's Supper with me? Those are some of those open-handed issues that we can agree to disagree on. But then you're kind of alluding to some of these close-handed issues, the idea of the atonement, the idea of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead after 3 days, the idea of, is Jesus Lord? Is Jesus the only way? And so is that a fair characterization that I'm saying, making with you?
Yes,
of the idea of
absolutely.
progressive Christianity typically has had more questions than answers, and they're questioning some of those things that are the close-handed issues that are really not up. They're not up for debate. They're very clearly identified within the scriptures, and those are the very core of what it means. What does it mean to be a hamburger kind of deal? If you take away certain components of the hamburger, then it's no longer a hamburger. What does it mean to be a Christian? When you take away the atonement of Jesus Christ and the resurrection, you take away Christianity. Because, again, what Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 15, then we are just fools, right?
Right. No, that's well put, because I think the thing that is the one unifying factor in progressive Christianity is the idea that Christianity itself is actually progressing. Mm-hmm. So it's like you can have one progressive Christian that might still affirm a physical resurrection, and you might have another one that doesn't, but they're fine to be in unity together because they're not seeing that there are these essentials that we have to hold to. And a great example of this is Rachel Held Evans. I just read her book on the Bible, and it's tough. She's a very thoughtful writer, so I don't mean to oversimplify her ideas. It's hard to just take, an entire book that she's written and simplify it into a couple of thoughts. But, for the sake of our purposes, what she did was basically just annihilate the authority of the Bible, the historical reliability of the Bible. She seriously questioned the supernatural elements of the Bible, and basically she outright said that we have to look at what the Bible says and follow our own moral compass, that if God is doing something that we think is bad or wrong, then we need to go with our gut. She actually said, go with our gut. And so, but at the same time, I don't get any indication that she's denying a physical resurrection. Maybe she has, but she didn't seem to in the book. And she mentions the resurrection without really defining what she thinks it is, but I didn't get any indication that she doesn't think it actually happened. Whereas Rob Bell, in his book, which one was it? I think it was What is the Bible? Mm-hmm. He just, in a parenthetical quip about the resurrection, assuming his readers don't think it was literal. And so, I mean, he's so far beyond that, he's just assuming that his readers don't affirm that. And so that you can have these various degrees of belief and unbelief and questioning, but they're very unified in their rejection of historic Christianity.
That's fascinating. So when you think about progressive Christianity, and especially from your perspective, and you're writing quite extensively on this, you've got podcasts on this, so we've got probably about a minute left. What are some, and then we'll have to take a break again. We'll pick back up with it after the break. Help us to be able to understand, what are some of those cultural issues? Are there cultural issues where kind of the progressive Christianity is starting to veer and maybe ask more questions than accept some of the answers that have been tried and true and have been passed on to us from previous generations? Are there certain issues that make their way into the culture, those value issues that progressive Christianity tends typically to veer one way or the other and moves away from the biblical narrative?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, progressive Christianity is 100% united in their belief that either that the Bible affirms monogamous same-sex relationships, or that the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about it, or that they would reject what they think the Bible says about it if it's negative. So there's an overwhelming unity in affirming monogamous same-sex relationships. And yet we've also seen some progressives on the fringe even affirming polyamorous relationships that they're somehow calling holy. And so they have largely rejected the biblical view of marriage and sexuality. That's something that is, if there is a tenet of progressive Christianity, that would be one for sure.
Yeah. And so we've got to take a break, but we've been talking with Alisa Childers. We're going to be we're going to have to jump off here for a second, but then when we come back from the break, I've been really interested to hear your perspective on kind of some of the analysis specifically relative to kind of monogamous relationships as well as homosexuality that's making its way into the mainstream relative to Christianity, and kind of alluding to, but not necessarily specifying, God and the Gay Christian, which is a book by Matthew Vines, which is very much persuasive, as well as one of those seminal works that right now is being kind of tapped into relative to kind of the argument to make acceptable the idea of homosexuality from a Christian perspective. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, more with Alisa Childers. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You probably know the story of Aaron and Melissa Klein, the bakers in Oregon forced out of business and fined $135,000 by the state when they politely declined business that would have forced them to violate their religious convictions. What you may not know is that after the state of Oregon pronounced them guilty of discrimination, private citizens were eager to show their contempt for the Kleins. Many of the comments they received are so vulgar that I cannot repeat them here, but here is a tame sampling. One person writing on Facebook said to the Kleins, "I hope your shop burns." Another chimed in, noting that she hoped Aaron and Melissa would burn in hell. One man sent a message that said, "I hope you lose your house and have to live on the streets." One woman even said, "We hope your children get cancer and die." When the government declares that citizens like Aaron and Melissa are not entitled to the Constitution's promises of religious liberty and free speech, its people push aside any goodwill that allows people to coexist peacefully with beliefs with which they may disagree. Aaron and Melissa have asked the Oregon Supreme Court to review their case. We hope the court will accept the appeal, if only to remind everyone that it is possible to live peacefully as neighbors, even when we disagree. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, and we have Alisa Childers with us on the line, formerly of ZOEgirl, now a worship blogger, kind of a worship leader, a blogger, a mom, a wife, and we have been talking with her a little bit about progressive Christianity. Specifically, we've been talking about this issue of homosexuality within the progressive Christian kind of movement and how that's continuing to kind of become more and more pervasive in the culture today. And I think what's interesting is what you're finding is that there's becoming more of an acceptability towards it, and it's really taking individuals. They're being swayed by the arguments that are being made by the likes of Jen Hatmaker as well as Matthew Vines, who wrote the book God and the Gay Christian. Help us to be able to understand this, Alisa.
Well, that, like I kind of said before the break, that is almost the one non-negotiable tenet of progressive Christianity. If there ever was just one tenet that they're united on, it's this. It's that Christians need to rethink what we've always believed the Bible says about sexuality and about marriage. And so this is something that has never been disputed in church history until just very recent modern times. And so, of course, you mentioned Matthew Vines and his book, God and the Gay Christian. He runs an organization called Reformation Project, and you can go to reformationproject.org and click on their 10 biblical points where they're making, in their view, they're making a biblical case for same-sex monogamous relationships to be blessed by God, that can be ordained by God and can be celebrated and affirmed within the church. And the interesting thing about the organization that he runs is it's sort of viewed as a grassroots organization. So the people can go on the website, they can get the training, they have conferences where they'll train people, and then the goal is for the person to then infiltrate a local church at the just the personal level, join a small group, get to know people. And the idea is that if the average Christian can make a gay friend or can, come on some emotional level to that, then they'll change their theology. And so the whole point is to go into these churches and begin to change the minds of Christians just on the congregational level, and then moving its way up into the leadership, into a more public and official affirmation of same-sex relationships. And it's very effective. They're doing a very effective job at convincing a lot of otherwise, unknowing Christians that the Bible actually celebrates this, and that this is something that God calls good and beautiful. And so they're having a powerful effect.
Yeah, I think there's a key delineation I think we need to be able to make, and I know you would agree with this. There's the one component that we need to love, right? Like Christians are to be known by their love, and like one of the beautiful things about love is it compels us to be able to go, right? That's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:14. Christ's love compels us to be able to go. And so one of the things that I'm always convicted by, provoked by, is the idea of, one, I want to be able to love. I want to be able to love my neighbor, whether my neighbor is heterosexual or homosexual. But I think a key part to being able to love is, one, to know them, and then two, to speak truth to them. It would not, and sometimes truth requires you to kind of endure temporary discomfort for long-term health. I know that there are many parents, and I'm sure your kids have, every once in a while, if they're anything like me, there's just some gravitational pull that's moving them towards the street. I don't know what it is, but playing in the street is just a lot better than playing in the yard. But as a good parent, because you love your kids, you know that playing in the street is detrimental to their health and is dangerous for them. So you're willing to speak a hard truth in that moment to be able to get them, because you know from what you know to be true that it's not good for them to play in the street. And I think in the biblical narrative, the same can be said. It's not that we need to hide away from friends and we don't need to have gay friends, but rather sometimes it's going to require us to not necessarily yell at them, but to be able to say, it doesn't lead to the fullness of life, because the biblical narrative is testifying about Jesus. Jesus is the one that's the greatest champion for our joy. He's the one that's given us commands that are not burdensome to us, according to 1 John 5. It's this reality that he's come in order that we might live the fullness of life. And from the biblical narrative, it does not appear to be true that following after a homosexual lifestyle, of engaging in that type of behavior, doesn't lead to the completion of joy. And I would only assume it to be true that they're trying to live a life that experiences the most joy that they could have in this moment, because God died to give them the fullness of life. Wouldn't they want to have that full life with this life that is ever so precious in this world?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's where Christians, we are going to have to just buckle up and ask ourselves, do I think what God has said about gender and about marriage and about sexuality, do I think that what he said about those things is beautiful and hopeful and good, or am I going to be embarrassed about it and ashamed of it? And that's just where the rubber meets the road. We have to know where we stand on that. And so I think the thing with this coming into the progressive church, we talked about some legitimate critiques coming in through the emergent church back in the late 90s, early 2000s. One of the legitimate critiques was that the church hasn't done enough to help people who may struggle with same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria or something along those lines. And I think that's a legitimate critique. Our churches haven't really known what to do, and we're playing catch up a little bit, because I have friends who experience same-sex attraction, and it can seem overwhelming sometimes, but they're doing their best to live lives that are faithful to the biblical teaching. And we as Christians need to come alongside them, and we need to walk with them and love them and give them family and community and all of those things where we may have not done such a great job in the past. But the problem with the progressive church is that instead of finding the correct solution, which would be to walk with and love people who experience these feelings and these desires, their answer is to just celebrate it and affirm it. And then, that solves a whole lot of problems. And so, of course, Jen Hatmaker coming out in the last couple of years was just monumentally influential, because prior to that, even though if you followed her closely, you would know she was drifting from orthodoxy already. But in so many people's minds, here's Jen Hatmaker. She's so funny and she's so witty and she's such a great writer, and she feels like my best friend. And I love her community she's created online. And then when she comes out and affirms same-sex relationships, people didn't know what to do with her, because otherwise at that point she was still affirming technically biblical orthodoxy as far as atonement and things like that. And so her change of heart on that was it just really sent shockwaves into the evangelical world, because people didn't know, okay, what happens now? Do we not listen to her anymore, or do we just sort of, even though we don't agree with her on that, can we still be in fellowship and unified? And so someone that was so beloved in the evangelical world, like her, changing her mind on that, I think it's had a profound effect, like a domino effect on other people, especially ones who had really connected with her personally. And of course, though, after she did that, then other things start slipping. She's speaking at the Wild Goose Fest, and she was on the Pete Enns podcast and sort of expressing how, she's seeing the whole Bible in a new way now, and all of this. So it was sort of a domino effect in her life as well. But yeah, it's a huge pillar of the progressive church is that affirmation and that belief.
I think that's one of the interesting things too, because even when we see it with Jen Hatmaker, she brings along a following, just like we all have followings. There's all individuals that we all associate with. And C.S. Lewis even speaks to this, that friendship has a way of being able to rub off on us and causes us to change like the person, right? Hence the reason why the biblical narrative seems to be so clear that bad company corrupts good morals, according to 1 Corinthians 15:33, that iron sharpens iron. And so it's increasingly important for us just to be cognizant of the people that we're surrounding ourselves by, but also recognize the truth that what Flannery O'Connor says: conviction without experience leads to harshness. And we want to be gracious in our response to individuals, but also be gracious enough to experience truth. Well, thank you so much, Alisa, for your time. But we've got to take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor, and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you, 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View for this third hour on Thursday, October 25th, 2018. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you've decided to keep with us for this third hour. During the first hour, we talked a little bit about what was happening relative to some of the pipe bombs that were sent out to some Democratic operatives, the danger of it, the horror of it, but also the opportunity for us just to be able to understand the kind of the over-reliance on politics to a certain degree. We had Karen Kataline on, who is a commentator, columnist, talk show host, received her master's degree in social work, has done some writing for Daily Caller, The American Thinker. During the second hour, we had Alisa Childers on. She was sharing with us a little bit about apologetics, helping us to better understand the progressive Christianity, some of the emergent church, kind of some of the roots of that, and was just a very thoughtful time to spend with her. And now during the third hour, we've got a special guest with us over the phone right now. We've got Phelim McAleer. Phelim is one of the co-writers of the book Gosnell, the Untold Story of America's most prolific serial killer. Phelim, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I can't complain. I don't know if it'd do me any good if I did anyway. But nevertheless, Phelim, help us to understand. Tell us a little bit about your book, Gosnell.
Well, yeah, we had the book, so it became a New York Times bestseller, and it's now a movie as well. So it's in theaters as well. It stars Dean Cain, and so this is the book and this is the movie that Hollywood and the mainstream media don't want you to see. Kermit Gosnell, I'm sure many of your listeners know about it, but not because they read it in mainstream media, but he was a Philadelphia abortion doctor who is America's biggest serial killer. And he's not a serial killer because he's an abortion doctor. He's a serial killer because children were born alive and he killed them. He killed several patients, and he was allowed to do it uninterrupted for at least 17 years, but at least up to 30. His clinic was a house of horrors, and that was the grand jury's description, not mine. And it went uninspected physically for 17 years, where he was allowed to kill without compunction.
So help us to understand, Phelim, because you were one of the journalists to be able to break this story that, again, even certain entities were not even covering this during the time. What was the lead? Help us to be able to understand the timeline. How did you get the tip? How did you get the lead to what was happening with Kermit Gosnell? And help us to be able to understand that timeline perspective.
Yeah, well, I just happened to be in Philadelphia. I was promoting another film, Frack Nation, and I had a couple of days off in Philadelphia. And I'm a journalist; that's my background. And as a journalist, what do you do in your day off? You go and you look at interesting murder trials in the area because we're a bit strange like that. And went down to this strange murder trial, and I went in and saw the most extraordinary photographs. Heard the most shocking evidence, and there was Kermit Gosnell sitting a few feet away from me. But the most shocking thing of all was right behind me, was row after row of empty press benches. The prosecution had organized to have the biggest courtroom in Philadelphia because they thought they were going to be swamped with press. They weren't. The media didn't want to cover this, and there's a reason for that. This shines a negative spotlight on abortion. So I came back home to Los Angeles and told my wife, Anne, this is the story we're going to do now. And she said, no, we don't do abortion. And I said, okay. So I got her the transcripts, sent them to her, and she read them, and she came and says, this is what we're doing now.
Wow. So, just to help our listeners, so you're an investigative journalist, and so there's that aspect of you that's very much a part of it. And so you kind of you alluded to it a little bit in your remarks. You attributed a lot of this just because we'll say certain media entities aren't necessarily favorable towards airing abortion stories that are seen in a negative light. Is that pretty pervasive? And help us understand, why is that so pervasive, especially when you're seeing some of the horrors that came out of Kermit Gosnell's clinic? Help us to understand that.
You know, I'm not sure I understand it, but I can state it as a fact. You know, abortion is this protected thing with liberal journalists, with the left. It's the thing that cannot be broken. You know, they might have different opinions about energy or renewables or, different, trade unions. It might be varied attitudes. But on abortion, you're either for them or you're against them. And, that's the way they behave. And, abortion is this sacred thing, and they do not want to cover anything. And they may not admit it to themselves, but they do not want to cover anything that will have a negative spotlight on abortion. And, it's not outright. They don't sit together, and have a meeting every Monday morning in the mainstream media and decide what not to cover. But they all take this decision that there's more interesting things out there. And anything that's negative about abortion just doesn't get covered.
And I mean, in some of your work that you were doing, especially when you translated a lot of the work from the investigative journalist component of kind of what was happening in the courtroom to what's being made into the movie now, help us to understand, what are some of those key aspects that you found in the story that were just so gripping, as well as just so significant for our listeners to be able, when they go and go see the movie?
Well, I urge people to go on the Facebook page. Actually, don't take my word for it. Or go on Twitter. People are very active talking about it on Twitter. And I mean, or go on Rotten Tomatoes. So there has been. So the mainstream media refused to review the movie. We got two mainstream articles, one in Forbes and 400 words in the LA Times. We got a couple of other minor publications, but we've got 1,300 real people reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a website, which is one of the main movie websites. I mean, read what they are saying. People are saying this is the movie that they've been waiting for years. We've had many people say it's converted them from pro-choice to pro-life. We've had people saying it's made them think again. We showed it to a liberal friend, a pro-choice person, and he left the room, went out, started chain smoking, and said, I have to rethink everything. I have to rethink everything. So, I mean, there are many things in it. How he was allowed. I mean, Gosnell was allowed to kill and keep killing because abortion was a hands-off topic. And a lot of the wrath was started by, interestingly enough, a Republican governor, Tom Ridge. So Tom Ridge ran as a pro-choice Republican, right? And when he got in, there was a law that said every abortion clinic had to be inspected every year physically. And he got in and said the law didn't actually mean that, even though it said that. And he suspended the inspections of abortion clinics. And so Gosnell was able to kill no one. The only reason they discovered him was because he was selling opioids. And when the DEA went in, that was the first time an official government person had been in that clinic for 17 years. So, he was allowed to kill on, without compunction for 17 years. So there's that aspect to it, how he was allowed to kill. Then the film also looks, the prosecution made a huge error. They thought, well, we need to explain to the jury what a good abortion is and explain the difference then between what Gosnell's bad abortion is. And they brought in this good abortionist and so-called good abortionist, and the jury was shocked about what a real abortion is. First thing they were shocked was they said to the woman, how many abortions have you done? And she said 40,000.
Wow. Oh, and we've got to take a break right now, but when we come back, we'll have more with Phelim McAleer. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Hannah Ayers is an LGBT student at Ohio University who serves in the Student Senate. She reported receiving hateful notes, including one that threatened her life. The Student Senate president assumed that at least one of the notes must have been written by someone in the Senate who would know which desk belonged to Ayers. Because of the turmoil, the Student Senate postponed all scheduled events. Instead, the students listened to Ayers speak and express her anger, frustration, and disappointment. She called the person who did that weak, cowardly, and worthless. Also, the university changed the locks on the Student Senate doors and established new office hours. Now, before you get too angry about what happened to Ayers, you might need to know that she was arrested for making false claims. The Ohio University Police Department found that she placed the messages in the Student Senate office, along with one in her residence, by herself prior to reporting them. Sadly, these false threats are becoming all too common on college campuses. Just a few months ago, my commentary was on the rash of fake hate crimes. There are websites dedicated to document these fake crimes. Many of them are perpetuated by black activists in order to convince us that racism is alive and well on campus. Others are done by Muslims, perhaps to gain sympathy for their religion or to promote the idea that Islamophobia can be found in America's universities. This latest fake story perhaps was done to promote the LGBT agenda or merely to draw attention to her sexual orientation. I applaud the school for arresting her and for the university to follow up with a story explaining that these were false claims. We need some deterrent in order to prevent future hoaxes like this. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Graceworks Pictures, Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather. Rated PG-13, opens October 26th, indivisiblemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We are joined over the phone by Phelim McAleer, who is the one of the co-writers of the book Gosnell, the Untold Story of America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. And Phelim, you were kind of sharing with us right before the break the size and the scope of just some of the atrocities that Kermit Gosnell perpetuated in Pennsylvania, especially when it was coming to the courtroom testimony between what's a good abortion and a bad abortion. Sorry we had that commercial break, but go ahead and continue to share with us.
Yeah, no, the prosecution, decided, that it would be important to show what a good abortion is and what a bad abortion is. So they've got this good abortion doctor, so-called good abortion doctor, a legal abortion doctor, help and to explain just what a good abortion was, and how it's illegal to kill, or how you shouldn't kill, babies. Gosnell stabbed babies after they were born. Now it's not in the movie. We don't show that in the movie. The movie is PG-13. It's not gory. I want to emphasize, but through very skillful questioning, the defense lawyer asked the doctor, what happens if a baby's born alive? And she said, we give it comfort care. He probed that. And then she said, we keep the fetus warm. Eventually it will pass. And, so in other words, Gosnell was on trial for his life. It was capital murder for killing babies after they were born by stabbing them. But it's perfectly legal to let a baby die of dehydration and neglect and hunger. And the jury had real problems with squaring that circle, as I think many Americans would.
Yeah, that's the atrocities that were just perpetuated through Kermit Gosnell. I mean, it's still even, again, having, being aware of what abortion is, and then also kind of glancing through your book. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that it happens here in the U.S. of all places.
Yeah, people are, I think that's what the jury got really surprised at. They did not know. People did not know. I mean, we didn't know. Myself and my wife, we didn't know. Planned Parenthood are geniuses. Planned Parenthood are geniuses. I'm a cynical journalist. I know a lot. I know things. I investigate things. I find out things. I didn't know that that's what an abortion was. Planned Parenthood had me convinced it's a meaningless clump of cells, and let me tell you, I've investigated it, and it's not a meaningless clump of cells, and it's not this minor surgical procedure. It's ripping arms and legs, and there's someone, it's comfort care, such a name, comfort care, which is basically the killing a baby by neglect, by allowing it to starve to death or die of dehydration.
And just as
that is legal.
And just as there's and I'm not alone with some of the individuals that were shocked and the reactions that was coming out of that. I mean, over the weekend, you all, it reports that you on just 668 screens, you all earned upwards of $1.2 million. But tell us a little bit about what's happening right now, because you all are facing a little bit of backlash against some of the movie theaters that are shutting it down or pretending like the movie's closed. Help our listeners to be able to understand that.
Yeah, we were doing really well in a number of big theaters. We're one of the top performing films. What did they do? They just decided to throw us out and bring in another movie. It kind of goes against their financial interests, but perhaps not their ideological interests.
Wow. So even though you were performing at a financially high level, I mean, I'm reading one of these reading an article right now that's available on our website. It's talking about how you were performing in the top 10 of some of these 30 screen movie theaters, but yet they were moving you off. So you're attributing that to kind of a bent against a pro-choice bent to some of these movie theaters?
Yeah. I mean, listen, it doesn't make sense. It's inexplicable from a business point of view. So when it's inexplicable from a business point of view, there must be other motives, and I have to say it must be politics.
And so for some of our listeners right now, I know that you might have some questions, and so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. We're talking with Phelim McAleer, who's one of the co-writers of the book Gosnell, The Untold Story of America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. You can go also on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, share your question or comment, and we'll try to get it with Phelim as well. So Phelim, for some of our listeners right now who are kind of hesitant towards going to see this film, what would you say are some of the key elements? What would you say, how would you motivate them they're hearing about some of this, but they're like, I don't know if I really want to see this or not. What would you say to that person that's a little hesitant right now towards seeing this?
This is a movie that Hollywood and the mainstream media don't want you to see. If you've been complaining for the last 30 years about Hollywood not having your values, if you're complaining about the TV not having your values, it's time to stop complaining and support something that tells something from your point of view, tells the truth, actually. If you're tired of the lies, go and support something that tells the truth. They don't want you to see it, and there's a reason they don't want you to see it. This has already converted people from pro-choice to pro-life. This has made people think again. This has brought facts to people. People are bringing their children, their teenage children, and they're saying it's led to really, really interesting conversations in the car on the way home. And I would say, go on the Rotten Tomatoes, check out the readers' comments, 1,200 at the moment.
Was there
have a look at those. Go ahead.
As being you were one of the key influencers, one of the key leaders of this film, and then also of just the recounting of the book as well. So is there stuff that's not in the movie that you wish would have made it in, or something that you wish maybe our listeners should be able to be watching for while they're watching this or reading the book?
Yeah, well, listen, I think it's is a much. Yeah, I mean, the book has enormous detail. The book has enormous detail, and if people would like to read the book, the book is tougher than the film. The book is a tough read, and we're journalists, honestly, and I think that makes it even worse because it's just literally written, and it's just relentless negativity. Whereas the film has to be entertaining. There's a little bit of humor in it. There's acting. There's Dean Cain, who I know a lot of your female listeners like watching, apparently. and we've got Sarah Jane Morris, who's an actress who I'm sure many of your male listeners will like watching too. So the film has to look good. Nick Searcy, if you know him from Justified, he plays a big baddie in it. So it's a Law and Order episode. It's not, it's a procedural cops and drama, trial drama, courtroom drama, and people really, really like it, and they really are so happy that we've made it. And I think it's time for your listeners to stop complaining and start doing. It's in 500 and something theaters now. If it's not near them, a lot of people are just going online, buying a ticket, giving us, it's kind of a donation. But some people said, rather than giving money to a congressman, $10 to a congressman, they bought a movie ticket. We've had people buying movie tickets in memory of the children who died. We've had just wonderful, wonderful responses. And as I say, it's changed many people from pro-choice to pro-life.
Phelim, okay, so for our listeners, one last question before we got to let you go. Help us to be able to understand, where can we find out more information about the film, as well as maybe about you and how we might be able to go see it?
Oh, yeah, well, you can go to gosnellmovie.com, and then you'll see there the list of theaters, but you'll also see the trailer, etc. Gosnellbook.com if you want the book. This is the truth about abortion in America. And honestly, the truth will set you free. And I think that's why the left and the liberals hate it so much.
Well, Phelim, thank you so much for joining us. I think one of the interesting things about this film, and again, just I think what we see from the social science research, it's very clear that when individuals have the opportunity to be able to see some of these children, whether it's in some of the medical technology for some of these expectant mothers, one of the things, it humanizes it. And when you humanize it, it makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of go through some of these procedures. But one of the interesting things and tragic things that Phelim has done so well, but tragically what we're finding out is there are individuals that had no clue about some of the atrocities that were happening in Pennsylvania. And because of that, the atrocities continued to be perpetuated into the years to thousands upon thousands of individuals were the victims of crimes by Kermit Gosnell. And we are exceedingly grateful for the work of Phelim, being able to document this, one, and then two, to do it in such a way that it could be gripping and compelling. Because there's an individual, N.T. Wright, he often says that you can tell someone to do something and it will change their day, but you can share a story and it will change their life. And I can't recommend this movie highly enough, that it is the type of film, that it is the type of story that hopefully will not only change your life, but also maybe save a life of an individual that is contemplating or considering abortion. Because if the statistics are correct, abortion isn't just being committed by individuals that are outside the church, that the numbers indicate that individuals inside the church are committing abortions as well. Upwards of 50% of the abortions that are being committed are by women that would identify as Christians. And so I want to continue to encourage you to check out the film, which you can find more information on our website if you just want to go there at pointofview.net. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking about some of the day's news, specifically the latest updates on some of the bombs that have been sent to Democratic operatives. And we'll be back, though, right after this.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
So there's this guy named Jordan. He's a healthy guy. He's a dad of 6, and he works as a guide in Alaska. And he goes to the doctor, true story, he goes to the doctor and he's diagnosed with cancer, stage 4. And here's the thing. He had switched earlier from medical insurance to Medishare, where Christians share each other's medical bills. So the question for Jordan and his wife, Jenny, was, is this actually going to work?
Our medical bills exceeded $160,000. Medishare members shared all our bills.
And it was about more than just the money, too. This is a real community.
Medishare is a family, a group of people that stick with you through the hardest times of your life. I just don't know how I could have done it without Medishare.
It's so worth looking into. There's a reason this is growing so fast. So if you want to find out more, here is a number for you. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. It's been quite a show for you all today. We've had quite a bit of interviews that we've been going in and back and forth with. We had Daniel Greenfield earlier, or actually we had Karen Kataline earlier talking about Antifa and specifically just some of the us versus them mentality that all too often characterizes our political discourse. Then we had a little bit with Alisa Childers, who's an apologist, formerly of a ZOEgirl, and she was sharing with us a little bit about progressive Christianity and how some of those elements of progressive Christianity have made their way into the mainstream, and which has benefited from some of her comments as well. And then we just had Phelim McAleer on, who is a co-writer of the book Gosnell, the Untold Story of America's Most Prolific Serial Killer, that documents some of the work, tragic, catastrophic work that Kermit Gosnell did in Philadelphia, and kind of documented it through the book as well as through the movie, which you can highly recommend you to go see. You can go to our Point of View website, pointofview.net, to be able to find out more information. But now it's just you and I, and so there's no more interviews. We are just going to be talking about the day's news, and I'm wanting to hear from you, because right now what we're going to be talking about is some of the just the atrocity, I would call it tragedy, really just the unfortunate circumstances that cause some individual or individuals, we don't know right now, to send pipe bombs to these Democratic operatives and leaders as well. And so we want to hear from you. What is causing individuals to do this type of stuff? Is this good? Is this bad? Why is this happening right now? So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. I'd love to hear from you, because I mentioned in the daily briefing the other day a kind of a quote from Rousseau. Rousseau says that it is impossible to live at peace with those that we regard as anathema, as I'll say for some of our listeners, so my producer doesn't edit me because of the other word that's anathema, which I think some of you can pick up on, is this idea that we literally impugn the worst motives to people that are on the other side right now, to the extent now that we have an individual that's targeted upwards of 8 Democratic leaders and sent them pipe bombs of some form or fashion. This all started yesterday. The news broke that officials had started receiving these prominent Democrats across the country, from former President Barack Obama to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, as well as former President Bill Clinton to Joe Biden. Our former vice president received 2, from what some say. Maxine Waters, a Democratic congressman, and a variety of other people received some of these, even to the extent that CNN received one of these packages at their New York studios. And in the absence of answers, speculative theories abounded. So Candace Owens of Turning Point USA, in a now deleted tweet, went ahead and said that I'm going to go ahead and state that there's a 0% chance that these suspicious packages were sent out by conservatives. Caravans, fake bomb threats, these leftists are going all out for the midterms. President Trump, at his rally last night, blamed the media, and he said, quote, "The media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories." But again, it wasn't limited to the right. Like, I think it's really important for us to understand that many on the left were pointing their finger and saying that this person was spurred on, though they don't even know who the person is, was motivated and spurred on and catalyzed by President Trump. And so they started circulating this video that highlighted instances where he was calling individuals to violent actions, to punch them or to get and so each side is pointing the finger at the other side, and it's really epitomizing what John F. Kennedy said over 50 years ago when he said that victory has 1,000 fathers, but defeat is an orphan. This continues to point towards this rising sense of hatred that we have for one another that was documented in the book Prius or Pickup. That it indicates that even just over the past 18 years, that the rise in hatred, partisan hatred for the other side, has jumped upwards of 30 to 40 points in some instances, where individuals quite literally are hating one another. That we even look at other data points. And so another data point that we can point to is the fact that we're starting to see numbers of upwards of 50% of Republicans are saying that they would be unsatisfied and displeased if their children married someone from the other party. And so I'd love to hear from you. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We went back and forth a little bit with Karen on this during the first hour, but I know many of you couldn't listen just because we were only in Dallas area as well as Minnesota. But now we're opening it up to the nation, and obviously there's a couple of you that are calling right now, so we're going to start taking some phone calls right now. We've got Mabel in California right now. Mabel, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing so well, Mabel. What is your point of view?
You're still doing a good job, by the way. I don't know if you recorded me the other time, so
well, thank you.
Your chance today. Well, what I want to say is, first of all, it's a very bad thing that happened. We're just grateful that nobody was, injured or hurt or killed. I do think the problem I have, though, is I think the Democrats are being very disingenuous. They seem to have forgotten all the stuff they've said and done, and suddenly it's all Donald Trump's fault. Asking people to follow people into restaurants. They can't have a meal in peace. I know a few weeks ago you had somebody on who was almost stabbed at a farmer's market. We've had senators that have been shot at a baseball game, So if you are asking people to agitate, somebody on the other side is not going to like it, and that person may have a short rope. And, again, like I said, it's wrong, but I think they're reaping the consequences of some of the stuff that they've been saying and urging their supporters to do. And they will do well to step back and, think about the stuff they've said and done and own their role in what's going on, because right now it seems like they think it's all Donald Trump's fault. And honestly, I have listened to him a few times. I haven't heard him agitating his supporters to do anything against Democrats. He's urging them to come out and vote. He decries what they're doing wrong. He believes they're doing wrong, and he's not happy with the press. But I personally haven't heard him say anything that would, obviously he's frustrated by their tactics and all of that, but I haven't heard him say anything that would, encourage anybody to do that. And I don't think he's responsible for what somebody somewhere has done.
Yeah,
that's my point of view.
I think you bring up a really great point. I think it's really difficult for Mabel, for us to be able to impugn motive to individuals when he or she, individuals aren't specifically calling for that. And so I'm always a little hesitant, especially on both sides of the aisle, when someone says, well, the reason why this is happening because this person did. Well, causation doesn't equal correlation. Individuals, just because we don't know these things, right? Especially from the biblical perspective, we don't know the mysteries of the heart. We don't know why it does what it does. That's why we have this system that's set into place in order that we might be able to discover the truth in this. And so I think it's really important. You bring up a great point, Mabel. It's hard to attribute cause and motive to individuals, especially when we don't even know right now who did what right now. And so to be able to attribute motive to that just seems very, one might say it's a little bit of an overreach. And so we're going to jump on over to Texas right now. We got Patricia in Texas. Patricia, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Patricia, what's your point of view?
Okay, the lady spoke quite a bit about the bombing, and that the president wasn't the one that was encouraging it on. But from my point of view, and seeing so much on TV, Donald Trump did say about the Democrats, they were the cause of this and they were the cause of that. And each time he said about the Democrats. Now, the tongue can kill you or take you to the grave. Mm-hmm. Are you just in the middle of it? Mm-hmm. That's what the Bible says. The tongue is sharp, mm-hmm. and it can hurt people. But he did mention more than just 2 times about the Democrats. Now, the hate and the things that's brought up because people are we're at the end times, and the end times say that people will be killing people each other, and that includes the United States, which they're going through so many different things. because of the divisions that's going on. And I know as some of them say, that's his ways, but the Bible doesn't say that. It says, watch your tongue and what you say. And some people say that he's a Christian, but there's no way that he can be a Christian, and he might be the baby Christian, but he's still spitting out poison and fire and so much each time he come on. Then he try to lay it on the media.
Yeah.
Well, one of the media is the good news.
Well,
Why?
Patricia, we've got to go to a break right now, but I think you bring up a great point relative to the power of the tongue, and so we're going to come back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You probably know the story of Aaron and Melissa Klein, the bakers in Oregon forced out of business and fined $135,000 by the state when they politely declined business that would have forced them to violate their religious convictions. What you may not know is that after the state of Oregon pronounced them guilty of discrimination, private citizens were eager to show their contempt for the Kleins. Many of the comments they received are so vulgar that I cannot repeat them here, but here is a tame sampling. One person writing in on Facebook said to the Kleins, "I hope your shop burns." Another chimed in, noting that she hoped Aaron and Melissa would burn in hell. One man sent a message that said, "I hope you lose your house and have to live on the streets." One woman even said, "We hope your children get cancer and die." When the government declares that citizens like Aaron and Melissa are not entitled to the Constitution's promises of religious liberty and free speech, its people push aside any goodwill that allows people to coexist peacefully with beliefs with which they may disagree. Aaron and Melissa have asked the Oregon Supreme Court to review their case. We hope the court will accept the appeal, if only to remind everyone that it is possible to live peacefully as neighbors, even when we disagree. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, and we have been talking a little bit about some of the, I guess, just the stunts, the tragedy. I don't even know what to call it, what happened yesterday and what continues to unravel today. Just the political individuals that were targeted because of some of these rudimentary forms of pipe bombs that were sent to Democratic operatives and leadership all across the country right now. More details are kind of spilling in right now, but what we know is what we don't know, a lot of stuff. At the end of the day, there's a lot of finger pointing that's happening, that you've got Candace Owens of Turning Point USA that was pointing towards the leftists and saying that this was all a matter of timing for the midterm elections, in her now deleted tweet. To then you've got President Trump that's attributing this to the media, and then you've got the left that's attributing this to the words of President Trump. And then, but while the finger pointing is going up, the hatred also is going up as well. is increasingly we're impugning bad motives upon individuals. And not only are we impugning bad motives upon individuals, but we're also hating them, just thinking the very worst of them. And so I am just interested right now in hearing your perspective on why for all of this, how for all of this. Why is this happening at this particular moment, and what can we do to make of it? And so we've been taking some of your phone calls. We'll continue to take some of those phone calls at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can jump over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. But we're going to jump on over to Susan in South Carolina right now. Susan, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Susan, what's your point of view?
Well, my point of view is you're saying, why is this happening? And I think we as Christians, we know why this is happening. This is the end times, and people are just going to be getting worse and worse, unfortunately. And my comment about the pipe bombs, and then I'll get off the phone. My point on the pipe bombs is, honestly, as a distraction with the midterms coming up, I would not be surprised if certain people, whoever sent it, could possibly be actually affiliated with the Democrats. You said it was rudimentary. I can't say the word. That the bombs were not very well made.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could be just like, okay, well, even if they had gotten to that person, it wouldn't have hurt them. We just did this as a distraction, but we're not telling anyone. And so now, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
It could be just used as a distraction. And I'm horrified about the caravan that is coming towards our borders.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that something I came across about that they might have to impose martial law. Did you all address that earlier?
No, ma'am. I've not come across that.
Okay, that Jerry Brown, if the caravan tries to breach the border in California, that Jerry Brown might just be welcoming them with open arms, and that the federal government might have to step in.
Wow. Yeah.
So just a lot of stuff just to distract from people going out to vote.
It's fascinating because you bring up a great point in the extent that you're just kind of revealing all of this, all of these moments that have been highlighted or that have happened over just the past month. I don't know if you remember, it seems like just yesterday, but it also seems forever ago that we were talking about an anonymous op-ed that was in the New York Times from within the Trump administration to then,
right.
Then the Avenatti and Julie Swetnick making the claims that Brett Kavanaugh was a drug dealer that was running a sex ring to a certain extent in high school, to now we're at a point where there's pipe bombs that are being sent. We're moving in not a new cycle anymore, but a new cyclone. And especially for Christians, it's just this extent that it's almost like, what is going on right now? This is just unbelievable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah, it's just unbelievable right now. And I think one of the things that's just very disheartening for me is that I think there's a level of many individuals, and I think many of you are probably listening can resonate with this. There is the extremists on both ends. There was a recent study that was put out and highlighted by David Brooks in his column in the New York Times, that it indicated that there's just these two significant outliers that are really dominating the conversation right now. And what they found is that they can put a number to this. So there's 8% on the left that are kind of the extremists, the outliers, and then there's 6% on the right. So again, it's not just one side or the other. It's both sides, the radical parts of both sides. But I thought what was most fascinating, and I think what many of us can resonate with this, is that there's 73% of us that are right there in the middle that just feel exhausted by all of this right now. And what I'm most worried about for some of you all, as well as for myself, is that we would become apathetic with in the sense that we would just think that they've been telling me for 20, 30, 40 plus years that Washington's broken, that Washington's a swamp. We've believed that now. And now are we going to the extent that we're just going to apathetically disengage from it, which I think is just a very detrimental thing, because then you allow some of these activists, these just people that are acting evil, to be able to speak into this through sending of pipe bombs to people that might be their political enemies. We don't know right now. So again, we're going to continue on the phone lines. We got Luther that's in South Carolina right now. Luther, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Luther, what's your point of view?
But brother, it's like what happened in Charlottesville when President Trump said it's hate on both sides, he was bombarded because he said it was on both sides. Well, the truth is, it is hate on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And these bombs, it's no telling who sent these things. You know, I've heard of people coming up with all kind of things to hurt somebody else that's not even true, just like what we went through with here lately.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much hate.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe the majority of American people hate that bad toward other people and all. But the few that, small percentage that hates on both sides, they do all they can to cause more hate.
Yeah.
And the news and people, they just jump on it. They feel like the people wants to read that kind of junk, you know.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to the point just about I watched, listened to the point of view when I'm in my car, but most of the newscasts that I used to watch and all, I don't watch them now.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather watch Gunsmoke, you know. It's just these old shows that you didn't have cussing and sex going on, and it was just something you could listen to and kind of enjoy. But now there's very few movies or very few new programs coming, shows coming on that really the children shouldn't watch it and the adults shouldn't watch it.
Yeah, Luther.
But it's just all it does is just, you know, it just makes people come up. The younger generation is watching it and listening to it and accepting it. If the parents don't be able to explain to them what's right and wrong, they're going to go with what they hear and what they see.
Yeah, I completely agree, Luther.
They in colleges and universities, they're being taught against the history of the United States, from what I can understand.
Yeah, Luther, I think
Very
that's
few
one of the
people-
things that I think is so interesting right now. And I spoke about this during the first hour, is this overemphasis upon politics right now, that individuals are really trying to find their meaning, their life, their purpose, their hope from politics. And politics is an awful god. It's a great avenue by which we can express our love for God and love for our neighbor, to be able to advocate in order that we might be able to be the most productive citizens and seek the welfare of our community, is what God says in Jeremiah 29:7. But it makes for an awful God. But as we seek to look towards God and recognize that we bear the image of God, but God has called us to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, I think it's important for us to understand that we have to be the conscience of the state and not the servant of the state, as the king said. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll be back here again tomorrow.
From Graceworks Pictures comes Indivisible, based on the true story of Army Chaplain Darren Turner and his wife Heather.
It is with great honor that I have served my country, but I only stand before you today because Jesus is my rock, and because I have a family who loves and believes in me.
One marriage, one family, under God. Indivisible, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at indivisiblemovie.com.
A major problem with socialism is that it allows people to benefit from the hard work of others. It permits the idle and indifferent to live off the efforts of their neighbors. For a society to prosper, everyone who is able has to contribute. And that's the only way Point of View Radio can bring you truth. We are profoundly thankful for you who have joined the Truth Team and make this program possible. If you're not on board, join today. Invest in our future together. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.
You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found